There was blood everywhere. It was like cleaning up a murder scene, except I was cleaning up my own blood. I scrubbed the floors with bleach, but you can still see my blood stain in places. I kept my prayer book as a reminder of the day when the police barged into my home. To them, I'm just a divorced father whose life isn't worth anything. But somebody up there still thinks I have a purpose in this world. Alan. Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. So I like coming to Eliyahu. I've been coming here for years. I don't have to say a word, just sit down. He knows exactly how to do it, and he gets it right every time. Every time. נכון?
כן. כן, זה אחרי שנים, הייתי שנים.
כן, אבל אני לא זוכר אפילו פעם אחת שהיית...
שעשיתי לך משהו שאתה... כן, תמיד זה אותו...
כן.
מה שאתה אוהב, נכון.
I brought my son here for his first haircut. אתה זוכר?
כן.
כן.
בטח. חלקה.
כן. היה לפני כמה שנים.
בן כמה הוא היום?
הוא בן 12.
באמת?
כן.
וואו. וואו.
כן.
גדול, גדול מאוד בר מצוות.
כן.
בעזרת השם.
בעזרת השם. All my adult life, I've advocated for children's rights. I've worked with kids on probation. I've worked in children's homes. Before I got married, I was a licensed single foster parent for some of the most difficult cases in Chicago. I've consulted with the director of the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. And after we got married, we moved to Israel. I received my Israeli citizenship on January 31st, 2006. And 2 weeks later, the chairman of the Knesset Social Welfare Lobby recruited me as an advisor. At that time, I wasn't familiar with parental alienation or its devastating effects on children. All we knew at that time was there was a youth crisis in Israel, and it was only getting worse. It was strange because the data that we had in the Knesset at the time contradicted my experience in the real world. It was as if there were two different Israels. In the Israel of real world, you can't walk more than 2 blocks in Jerusalem without seeing a park full of children playing with their parents, both mothers and fathers. Israeli parents are very active in their kids' lives. They're not the kind of parents who give up on their children. However, a very different Israel exists on paper in the government. In that version of Israel, the rates of child abuse, child poverty, child neglect, and even crimes committed by the youth themselves were skyrocketing. This was while child abuse was at an all-time low in the United States and Europe. Israel was on its way to becoming the worst in child poverty in the United Nations OECD, and unfortunately by 2012 we earned that title. And the more money we would raise to address this youth crisis, the worse the problem would get. And I'm trying to find the Ministry of Welfare's budget to see how much resources they're putting into addressing parental alienation. Do you know where to find their annual budget?
Well, listen, I've been doing it for years. Actually fighting the welfare and everything for revealing information, and I can tell you that in all the years that I've been searching for information, including in one committee in the Knesset, well, you can't find any information. The only way is actually looking into other people's reports.
Yeah, but what about their annual report of how they spend the money that they receive?
But they don't have any report. They never reveal it.
For all the resources we had at our disposal, nobody on the Knesset Social Welfare Lobby had a clue that the root cause of all this was parental alienation. Since I didn't know about parental alienation, I needed to consult with an expert. So what is that?
The parental alienation syndrome is found where one parent consistently denigrates the other and works to brainwash the children against the denigrated parent. The parental alienation syndrome is properly described where this campaign of denigration by one parent against the other takes root in the child, and the child then denigrates the other parent with criticisms that are unjustified or exaggerated. Often we find the child is fearful of expressing love for the hated parent for fear that it will be displeasing to the loved parent. This process can cause complaints that can start out as minor, but when the child custody battle becomes ferocious, the small complaints can escalate into accusations of abuse. You'd be amazed at the gullibility of people who believe that a father, for 12 years, with no prior molestation accusation, would molest his daughter a week before a custody hearing. In order to understand parental alienation, one must understand the motivation of the alienating parent. It is not love for their children, but revenge against their ex-spouse that motivates alienators in these circumstances. If the alienating parent really loved their children, they would realize that having a healthy relationship with both parents is what is in the best interest of the child.
Nobody really knows about parental alienation until it hits home. In my case, it caught me off guard when I filed for divorce. Now, divorce is taboo in my family. I'm one of the only people in my family's history to file for divorce, so it wasn't a decision that I made lightly. I had heard that the Israeli family court system uses therapeutic jurisprudence, which is a fancy way of saying that social workers are supposed to provide therapy for the families instead of the judge weighing evidence to make decisions in the case. The concept sounded great to me. Instead of the most important decisions in my family being based on who has the best lawyer, we could instead have a licensed therapist counsel us through our marital problems and perhaps even avoid divorce altogether. My case was assigned to Philip Marcus, who was the vice president of the family court in Jerusalem and one of its architects. I didn't know it at the time, but he published a thesis arguing that parental obligations need to replace parental rights. He infused this mindset into the family court and its social services. He quotes a psalm about God as a father to the fatherless to equate the judge to God as a representative of the state who replaces the father as a parent. Now, the reason such a mindset is dangerous for any democracy is those rights have to go somewhere, and that somewhere is the government. And this is fundamentally contrary to the Human Rights Act and the Hague Conventions that Israel has signed. As soon as Philip Marcus took jurisdiction over my file, his first step was to throw me out of my home in the middle of the winter with no access to my resources. I nearly froze to death. You wouldn't think it gets cold in the Middle East, but it snows in the winter. The entire courtroom was just a kangaroo court with Philip Marcus. He told me he didn't care whether I lived or died, he only cared about child support. Very quickly, my situation turned desperate. I needed a good lawyer urgently. Without any money, I turned to legal aid to see if they could help me. They referred me to an English-speaking lawyer.
It's good to see you again. I'm Penina Shapira, an attorney in Israel practicing family law. I've been practicing for 20 years.
I guess a question that I have for you, you are a mother yourself, you have children, and you have grandchildren. And you have female clients who've been abused by their husbands, and yet you took my case.
And I took your case because when you came to me and you told me that you were looking to do an amicable divorce and that you and your wife had no longer, it was irreconcilable, and you came to me and I saw what your situation was. And from the start, maybe because you come from America and I speak English, we were able to communicate very openly and very easily. And as part of that relationship as a client and a lawyer, I accompanied you to your home before you were even divorced to talk about how to separate and how to sell the asset and how to deal with whatever needed to be dealt with. And I met you after you had already separated from your wife. The problems were already existent. But I remember the little one running to you on the couch and hugging you because he hadn't seen you for 2 weeks, and you had moved out of the house, and he was so excited to see you, so excited to see you. And it was such a positive beginning. I was sure that there's no question in my mind that this was going to be a first of an opportunity to be able to see parents separate, but be able to raise children together. And I didn't see it coming.
Months went by before the court-appointed social worker met with me. Meanwhile, my kids were completely cut off from me. And before then, they were accustomed to spending quality time with their father every day. It was horrible for my children to suddenly be cut off from their father for so long. But I finally had a meeting with a professional who I hoped would help us through our crisis in our family. I brought my credentials and documents with me to the meeting, thinking that we would be on the same wavelength as child welfare professionals, but she did not like my credentials at all.
Why was he judgmental? We have speak towards you.
I don't think she was judgmental.
Yes. She said you're doing very nicely, you're a good father, you're playing with the children very nicely.
What should she have said?
You, as we saw in the videos, you are very intelligent.
Yes. Well, thank you.
So, that's what the psychologist thought. And have you ever seen a connection center in the States?
Well,
it's like a train station. I know because friends of ours, our former director was there. Maybe she did to all the places. But they may say that it shouldn't be. You're the best part of the world. You shouldn't be supervised, and so on. In the United that's our talk.
She made a couple of things clear. One was that she had no intention of providing any therapy for us. And two was her job would be easier if I were to disappear and she only had to deal with one parent in my children's lives. She decided that I could see my children 1 hour per week under supervision in her office. In order to see me, my children had to go to a locked facility behind bars with an armed security guard in order to see their father. For the next year, we met in a small room with an 18-year-old girl fresh out of high school supervising us. Now, what message does that send to my children? They were completely cut off from their father for several months, after which they could only see their father 1 hour per week under supervision in a small office. It turns out that my story wasn't unique. In fact, 28% of non-custodial parents in Israel wound up under supervised visitation. It begged the question why Israel was using supervised visitation so excessively. My question wound up on the Knesset floor.
פעם בשבועיים לשעתיים בפיקוח. אני רוצה לשאול את השר, האם יש שימוש מופרז במרכזים כתחליף להסדרי ראייה? האם אין בכך פגיעה בקטין כלפי הוריו? מדוע אין מרכזים נוספים ומפגשים יותר אינטנסיביים? והאם יפעל השר לצמצום השימוש במרכזים שכאלה כבכל המדינות המפותחות בעולם?
טוב, ישבתי על חלק גדול קודם, אבל אני אשיב פעם נוספת. מרכז קשר הוא לא תחליף להסדרי ראייה. מרכז קשר זה מסגרת זמנית. זה לא דבר קבוע. המטרה היא לא מרכז קשר. המטרה היא שההורים, גם אם הם גרושים, גם אם הם פרודים, יוכלו לראות את הילדים שלהם בצורה סבירה, בריאה ונורמלית. להגיד לך שמרכז קשר זה דבר בריא ונורמלי, התשובה היא לא. אבל אם לא מרכזי קשר, בנסיבות בוא נאמר, המורכבות האלה, יכול להיות שבכלל הילדים לא רואים את ההורים שלהם. אין ספק שזה לא נוח, ואני מבין שאם אדם גר בבאר שבע ומרכז הקשר נמצא בחיפה, והוא עובד, והוא צריך לנסוע 4 שעות כל כיוון, כי לפגוש את הילד 2 או 3, זה קשה, לפעמים ההורים מוותרים על זה, וזה לא טוב לאף אחד. וכולנו מתפללים שכל מי שגם ירצה להתגרש, ושיהיה הכל בסדר, ואז אפשר לוותר על המרכזי קשר האלה.
תודה, אני רוצה להבהיר שאין לי ספק בכלל שמשרד הרווחה עושה עבודה מדהימה, ואני חושב שזה כיוון נכון. מה שמטריד אותי, שהשאלה נבעה מכך שמי הולך למרכזי קשר? אלה שיש סכנה להיפגעותם. זה בעצם מערכת להגנה על הילד. זה לא קשור להורים, זה הגנה על הילד. האם באמת החברה הישראלית מסכנת את ילדיה פי 6 מהנורמה העולמית? זה מה שמטריד אותי. האם יכול להיות שאנחנו ציבור כל כך אלים, שאנחנו פי 6 מכל המדינות המפותחות בעולם? אז אולי המדיניות של כיסוי הישבן היא בעצם הסיפור, ואולי השאלה היא תקציבית, ואולי טובת הילד, אם יש באמת סיכון, שיהיה יותר קרוב להוריו ולא אילוצים טכניים כאלו או אחרים יגרמו לכך שכל כך מעט ילדים יראו את הוריהם, אולי בגלל שהם נמצאים במצב של סיכון. זו באמת שאלה ערכית. האם אנחנו באמת חברה כזאת?
I turned to the court for therapeutic help, and their message was loud and clear that my life was worthless. It's hard to imagine that licensed therapists would deliberately make a vulnerable client feel worthless. It's even harder to imagine that this would be in a child's best interest. There was an awakening amongst Israelis that something needed to change.
If we saw the true statistics, we would feel, first of all, we would be able to relax a little bit more. We would not have this atmosphere of a war between the sexes. You wouldn't have the need to always look for the gender feminist leadership to protect the women from the evil men, because you'd realize that the picture is much more complex, and there's a protecting side in men also, and family is a place where people love each other basically and are supposed to support each other and help each other out. It's not necessarily a place of violence.
שלום, שמי רוני דרור, אימא לשני בנים, חילונית וליברלית, המגיעה מבית מסורתי. אני עובדת סוציאלית. בשנים האחרונות, במסגרת הדוקטורט שלי, אני חוקרת ועוסקת בתחום האלימות במשפחה. אך כיום מובילה אותנו לשיח חד צדדי נגד גברים, המכוון למעשה נגד מוסד המשפחה. השיח הזה מוצא את ביטויו האכזרי בעיקר בהליכי הגירושים, והוא מותיר עשרות אלפי ילדים הגדלים ללא אבא, אבות מיטיבים, ורובם כאלה נלחמים על ילדיהם, אך קורסים תחת הנטל של הניתוק, הניכור, תלונות השווא, המזונות ועוד. עשרות שנים של תיוג גברים כאלימים, מטרידים ואנסים פוטנציאליים כרסמו במעמד המשפחה. התהליך הזה חייב להיפסק. היד הקלה כלפי שלמות המשפחה מביאה גם להוצאה פזיזה מדי של ילדים מבתיהם. אנחנו חייבים לחזור לשיח המחזק את המשפחה, את הסמכות ההורית, את השורשים שלנו, את המסורת.
כשקובעים על סמך דברים שלא נבדקו לגופם, שהילד יראה את האב רק בימים כאלה ולא אחרים, רק במקום כזה וכן הלאה. בסופו של דבר נוצר מצב ראשית של נתק, כי ילד שרואה את אביו במרכז קשר, הוא לא יכול לבנות יחסים עם הילד. לא ניתן בחדר של 1.5 מטר על מטר, אני מבקשת לא למחוא כפיים. בסופו של דבר מי שנפגע זה הילד, זה האבא, זאת האמא וזאת המשפחה, מפני שמשפחה שאפשר היה לבנות אותה תוך כדי גירושין, כשאחד מכבד את השני, כשהילד מכבד גם את אביו וגם את אמו, וככה במקום לפתור בעיות, אנחנו יוצרים בעיות.
The mother was awarded custody. There was a certain assumption, it's called in Hebrew, חזקת הגיל הרך. חזקת הגיל הרך.
It's a tender years presumption?
Exactly, tender years presumption, where automatically a mother is more suited to raise her children.
But what happens when the mother abuses the children and the non-custodial father attempts to report that abuse to the court-appointed social workers?
Okay, Ellie, 2 days ago I came here with my children. What did you see? Who did that?
Ima.
Ima did that? I'm recording myself informing you of this.
No.
Yeah. You don't. You have an obligation to investigate this. Okay. Well, I'm recording that you're refusing to investigate anything.
Still, my own situation was as oppressive as ever. I knew I needed guidance and fast. Some friends recommended a social worker who had worked for the Jewish Agency to provide counseling for families in crisis.
Okay, I'm Sharon Spira. I'm a certified social worker both in the United States and in Israel. I was director of Parenting Center. I was director of Jewish Continuity. I had a variety of positions in the Jewish Community Center world. I also did Hebrew language intakes for a subcontract for public education system for children and families in need of additional help, exhibiting problems in the school system.
And we met in 2009.
Okay, that's over a decade ago, I know that. Right.
How did that happen?
How did we meet? I was running a support group for single fathers at one point that you were a member of, and after that you had approached me and said that you were mandated to seek some parental education with a social worker, and that's where our relationship began in terms of the professional dynamics of parental education in terms of being a single father. There was never a question for me that you were not a danger to your children. I think, unfortunately, in many cases, there is not an equal approach towards the mother and the father, at least in this country. Again, I'm not an expert on it, but it's not. I've seen too many cases to tell me that that is the case. And it was about convincing the system that, in fact, you could be a good father to your children. And I believe that over time we demonstrated that in many, many different ways within the school system, outside of the school system, in all kinds of ways and shapes. And it was a very hard sell. It was very, very difficult.
The first break in my personal file came when Philip Marcus was pressured into early retirement over his abusive behavior towards a homosexual couple. He had abused many other fathers like me the same way, but this incident was different because the couple was a protected class minority. We found an ally in the most unusual place, the director of the Ministry of Welfare. When Yossi Silman took office, he vowed to clean up corruption in the ministry.
אני רוצה להגיד שאנחנו לא מטפלים מספיק בגברים בקונפליקטים האלו. גבר שמורחק מהבית ונפגש עם הילדים במרכז קשר, אנחנו צריכים לעשות את המקסימום לעטוף אותו, להאכיל אותו וללוות אותו. זה משבר אמיתי, ואני הולך לרכז לפן הזה של הליווי, קבוצות תמיכה וכולי, כסף ותוכניות לעניין. אנחנו קצת מזניחים את הגבר בעניין.
מילה אחרונה. יש הרבה כאלה, לא כולם, אבל יש יותר מדי כאלה, שבאות עם אג'נדה מכוונת מראש, והאג'נדה הזאת, העובדות לא מעניינות אותה. זה שכאן האבא הוא תפקד כהורה העיקרי. זה שהאימא מתנהגת באופן פוגעני כלפי הילד, היא מסתירה את העובדות האלה מבית המשפט, או שהיא מטייחת.
This had a direct impact on my family. The social worker who had vowed never to let me bring my children back home with me was replaced with a new social worker. And so long as Yossi Silman was the director, I could rely on this new social worker to advocate for my children's best interest. And life was a lot better for everyone, especially my children.
Abba matok, Abba chacham, Abba tov. This I love you. And he's and he's smiling for you, and he's Abba, and he go like this.
Yeah, wow.
That was so fun, I almost broke my back. Hi, Abba.
Good morning.
עוד מעט אנחנו נכנסים עכשיו. ממש יפים, מאוד יפים. בלילה. מאוד יפים.
I returned to university to study degrees in sociology and organizational psychology, researching parental alienation in Israel. A court-appointed guardian's office hired me to handle some of the most difficult cases in Jerusalem. It was ironic. The same court that prevented me from raising my own children entrusted me to handle cases that involved people suffering from acute mental illnesses. However, everything changed when Yossi Silman went public with his findings of corruption in the Ministry of Welfare.
יש כ10,000 ילדים מחוץ לביתם במוסדות רווחה, או במשפחות אומנה, או בפנימיות. אני טנטטיבית אומר לך שאפשר לצמצם את זה ב-50%.
הריבוי של המוסדות וסוגי המוסדות, כל הצורות האלה, הן הולכות ומתרבות, עוד מסגרות ועוד מסגרות ועוד מסגרות. זו באמת תעשייה שהולכת ומתפתחת ומתרחבת, והכל על גב הילדים והמשפחות שלהם.
מה שאתה צריך לבדוק זה אם מספר הילדים עלה או מספר הילדים מצטמצם. אתה בודק את התקציב, אתה לא בודק את מספר הילדים.
אני מדבר על מספר הילדים שלא מצטמצם, הוא תמיד נשאר סביב 10,000.
הוא נשאר, לא, אתה עוד פעם תגיד 10,000 ואני אתן מספר אחר. המספר שאנחנו
רוצה שאני אראה לך?
כן.
המועצה הלאומית לשלום הילד, בסדר? שנת 2014. סך הכל ילדים בהשמה חוץ-ביתית, תראי למעלה. נתונים שלכם.
זה לא הנתון שאני מכירה.
Chaim Katz fired Josie Silman for going public with this information. Since then, the Ministry of Welfare doubled the number of children removed from their homes. They implemented more costly policies that forced non-custodial parents to jump through even more bureaucratic hoops to file any requests in court. This involved sometimes waiting for months on arbitration with additional social workers besides the ones who were already appointed by the court. In the post-Silman era, the Ministry of Welfare successfully petitioned the Finance Committee to increase their annual budget from $500 million per year to over $3.5 billion per year. By comparison, the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, with a population nearly double that of Israel, operates on an annual budget of $1.2 billion per year. In other words, Israel's welfare budget is 4 times higher than that of the United States or Europe. Yet parental alienation has only gotten worse each time Israel increases the welfare budget. That's because these costly programs are more unnatural and more restrictive for children, and that is a recipe for parental alienation. As soon as Josie Silman was fired, the social worker canceled our visits altogether. I was back to square one. It took my lawyer several months to petition a new judge to restore a visitation schedule. However, it was too little too late.
When did Abba do that to Ima?
Whenever my children were with me during those last few months, my ex would stalk us and attack me in front of the children. In this incident, she grabs an iron fence from a security guard to smash into my face. That was the sound of the gate smashing into my hands as I blocked the attack. My left hand had a book in it, and my right hand had the camera in it.
Don't turn violent. Don't turn violent.
Notice how she used both of her hands, and on recoil her elbow smashed into my child's head. And though she injured my hands, I'm glad she didn't injure my face.
So are there situations where the man attempts to file a police complaint?
They clearly can't. I had a man who came to court with a wound in his leg from a knife, a kitchen knife. And the judge asked him to leave the house. And when he said, "But she stabbed me," the judge said, "I can't have her walking the streets. You'll have to find somewhere to go." Clearly, it is not a balance.
Okay.
So filing with the police is not an answer for the man who's being abused, generally speaking.
So in Tel Aviv, there is this judge who has introduced this policy that says that allows the alienated parent to approach the court, fill out a form. They actually even provide a form for them to fill out that says that they're being alienated, parental alienation. And then it is the obligation of the custodial parent to explain that the non-custodial parent is actually a danger to the child. And so in other words, they put the ball in the court of the custodial parent to prove that the non-custodial parent is dangerous. And if not,
it's problematic. The solution is a partial solution. Mm-hmm. It does make the alienating parent responsible for their action and put some of the burden of proof on them. And what is it that's gone wrong that makes you behave this way, and why are the children so unhappy and don't want to see their parent. But then I think what will result is that the person who is alienated will have to defend himself against the allegations. So it's only a partial solution. I think it has to go together with other remedies.
Such as?
Such as sanctions, monetary sanctions. It's not fair. It's not fair that the father or mother is a bank to produce money on call every month, or has a fear of being jailed, go right to the hotzah lapa'al, and after a certain amount of time and a certain amount of responses, there's a chance of being jailed for defaulting on child support, but yet the child is not obligated on any level to have a relationship with that parent. And in order to be relieved of that child support, the maintenance ruling, the alienated parent has to prove that they have done everything to have a relationship with the child. And until he does so, he has to pay. And it can take 18 years to prove something like that, which is very similar to a story that we are aware of.
She sent the police to harass us on every visit. I was arrested and interrogated numerous times, and the trauma was overwhelming for my children and taking its toll on my health.
Go have a barbecue. Do you want to come have a barbecue with Abba? Okay. You want to tell Abba why you're sad? Huh? No? You don't want to talk about it? Let's go have the barbecue then, okay? We don't have to talk about why you're sad if you don't want to.
So, and I'm also not allowed to take out of the courtroom personal information. Okay. But allegations were made. And those allegations were not believed. And nobody went and stopped the visitations. And you were seeing the children. Until one day, out of the blue, they refused to come with you anymore. They refused to come to their visits. It was one child, then it was two children, and then it became three children who refused to come. And when you'd go, when you were supposed to go to their schools and to their camps, because it was summertime, to pick them up, they would turn and run to their mother, who was waiting there, watching to make sure they wouldn't go with you.
But nobody would intervene. Not the courts, not the police, not the social workers.
אוקיי, ובעצם אתה אומר שאם הולכים לחידוש קשר ואם מגדירים את זה ניכור הורי, אוקיי? אז חשוב שאלה יהיו...
זה בטח שזה...
זה להגדרתך.
לא, זה 100% מתאים לסיבה הזאת, כולל תלונות שקר. כל פעם שילדים הגיעו לביקורים איתי, ששלחה המשטרה אלינו, כל פעם שזה קרה, פניתי לא עשתה כלום. אז אחרי כמה שנים זה ייקח לילדים שאין כוח.
היא מכירה את החוק.
היא לא קשורה לזה.
אוקיי. היא שופטת. היא שופטת. איך שופטת לא מבינה את החוק?
היא מבינה את החוק, אבל זה לא איש שטיפלה בזה.
בסדר, אוקיי, יאללה.
תיכנס לאתר בתי המשפט, תראה.
לפי חוק אתם טועים.
וכשביקשתי שיגישו לי את המסמכים והפרוטוקולים של הדיונים של הוועדות שבהן הם ישבו, אז נאמר לי שזה חסוי. אמרתי להם, בסדר, חסוי, אבל אני רוצה לראות את זה, יותר מזה. כשפקידות הסעד נחקרו על התזכירים שלהם, התגלו סתירות שאני לא רוצה עכשיו להתחיל ולפרט כי הזמן קצר. הסתבר שגם כשהחלטתי שלא להפסיק את הביקורים, הדברים שלי נשארו אות מתה והם המשיכו בדרך שלהם.
It's heartbreaking for me to see that your children are growing up and they have no relationship with you after everything you have tried and attempted to do to be a good father. And I'll repeat that as many times as I can because it's the truth. That's the truth.
And this was the last time you've seen her?
So, this is some artwork that my kids and I did together when they were younger. My son made this bank, and My daughters made the rhino and the lion. And I keep their books over here. Some of them are in Hebrew and some in English. And this is their bedroom. I still have their room ready for them whenever they come. I have all of their things in here. I haven't seen my children for several years now, but my home is always open to them. And anytime they want to come, they can come and be here with me anytime.
Very sadly, you've had no contact with your children whatsoever, and not only that, but you've been closed out of even receiving information about your children from school systems, from doctors, and from other places that a parent should be getting information about their children from.
How can I help you?
I just found out that my daughter is in the school and nobody
What grade is this? The 7th grade. Isn't she here already, Vייסקופף?
Yeah, without my knowledge or consent.
You have a daughter who's registered here or not registered here? I don't understand.
Well, I was never invited to this vada, which is illegal.
Are you divorced?
Yes.
What is your name?
My name is Vייסקופף.
How did you get into school?
He wants this piece of paper in the shomer, let him in.
Okay, I understand there's a tzav and you're not supposed to be here.
Really? Who told you that?
I'm not sure. How can we help?
And you told me yesterday that somebody had told you that there's a restraining order. I can't come to the school.
Yeah, no, but I checked it. That is not correct.
Okay.
הבנתי שיש צו הרחקה לילד.
מי אמר לך?
לא יודעת, ככה שמעתי, אני לא יודעת. יש לך צו הרחקה ממנו?
מה פתאום?
אז אני לא יודעת.
רק שנייה, אבא של וייסקופף. רוצה לי שהייתה. זה וייסקופף. אוקיי, מחר היא תתאם איתך, אוקיי?
אוקיי, איך היא תחזור אליי?
יש לי את הטלפון, לקחתי אותו.
Even after they knew they were being manipulated into alienating my children from their father, the staff gave authority to my ex to be the one-sided and exclusive judge, jury, and executioner.
But for as long as there's no process in place that will prevent false allegations from being made and then being rewarded when in fact they are disproven, the system will continue, especially if we're dealing with the advent of parental alienation, because the whole goal of the alienating parent is purposely to distance and destroy the relationship between the other parent and the child. So if there's nothing that's going to work against that goal, and in fact it's going to reward that goal every time, then unfortunately these kinds of situations arise. It was basically all kinds of committees that met and decided based on the input of people that didn't have full stories, that didn't have access, and the lack of forcing a parent to be part of a therapeutic process that enabled the situation to come about. It's very sad. It's really, really very sad.
How does a court prevent parental alienation?
Again, we're still in our very, very first stages of dealing with it. In your case, you are one of the pioneers in this area, and we have been in court now 2 years, trying to get a court to recognize that there is parent alienation.
Decades of research shows that the long-term effect of parental alienation on children includes low self-esteem, drug abuse, and even suicidal tendencies. In other words, the effect of parental alienation on children is the same as physical and sexual abuse. The World Health Organization recognizes parental alienation as a psychological problem. In Israel, 2 populations at high risk for suicide are alienated fathers and children who've been victimized by parental alienation. This trend must stop for our children's sake. When a whole system perpetuates parental alienation, that society condemns its own future generations to social breakdown.
I will say that I believe that parental alienation has long-term, lifelong traumatic effects on children. Both for themselves as individuals and for the future lives that they themselves build in a relationship with another person, and if they themselves become a parent. So I think that it has multiple long-term, deep considerations that we ought to start taking note of and dealing with, and not keep ignoring them and sweeping them under the rug.
Parental alienation destroys the foundation of society, which is the loving bond between children and their parents. We can solve 90% of society's problems simply by implementing policies that consistently prevent parental alienation.
I believe that Israelis are the best parents in the world. Therefore, there's no excuse why Israel can't be #1 in the world for child welfare. I'm calling on Israelis to lead the way to form an international lobby on parental alienation, calling on court systems all over the world to implement consistent policies that prevent parental alienation. We're forming an international lobby right here in Jerusalem on parental alienation. Anyone, anywhere in the world is invited to come and join our movement. You can come to our website and sign up, where we will have updates consistently on the latest data on parental alienation. to close with an important message to my children. No matter whatever happens, I will